In this year, fierce foreboding omens came over the land of Northumbria and wretchedly terrified the people. There were excessive whirlwinds, lightning storms, and fiery dragons were seen flying in the air. That same year, on June 8th, the ravaging of wretched heathen men lamentably destroyed God's church at Lindisfarne through looting and slaughter. These stark entries, preserved across multiple manuscript versions of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, do more than just record a single catastrophe. They mark the trembling threshold of an era. On June 8, 793, longships with dragon prows sliced through the North Sea mists and beached beneath the holy island of Lindisfarne. What followed was not a random act of banditry, but a thunderbolt of history. The first great Viking raid on the British Isles. A spectacle of violence that shattered the illusion of Christendom's impenetrable shores. Monks at prayer were cut down amid the smoke of a burning scriptoria. Reliquaries were pried open. Their silver and gold were spilled with the blood of the priests. Sacred manuscripts, decades of patient illumination, fed the flames or vanished into sea chests bound for Scandinavian fjords. Those priests whom these raiders spared were destined for the slave markets of the north, and once sold to an unknown fate. As they were forced onto the ships with their new captors, the monks silently observed the burning scriptorium and chapel fade into the horizon. A warm orange speck outlined on the cold, unforgiving darkness of the North Sea. As they were splashed by the freezing waves and taunted by their pagan captors, they all knew one thing for certain. Their world, and the world of their Anglo-Saxon brethren, would forever be changed. The shock of this first Viking raid rippled outward, from the scriptoria of Yarrow in northern England to the courts of Charlemagne in Francia, as chroniclers grasped for the language to describe this new terror. One historian, Alcuin of York, safe in Francia, cried out in a letter, "Never before has such an atrocity been seen in Britain." Yet Lindisfarne was no isolated atrocity. It was the opening chord of a symphony that would resound for almost 3 centuries. From this blood-stained dawn unfolded the Viking Age, an epic of restless horizons and relentless reinvention. Norse seafarers driven by scarce land at home, superior shipcraft, and an appetite for wealth, fanned out in every direction. Eastwards, they expanded along Russian rivers and forged trade routes that linked Baltic amber to Byzantine silk. Westwards, they crossed the Atlantic, planting colonies in Greenland and leaving bootprints on the shores of Vinland, 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus. Southwards, they carved kingdoms in Sicily and Normandy, their descendants one day conquering England itself under William the Conqueror. And the crucible of raid and settlement, the medieval world was hammered into new shapes. Feudal kingdoms consolidated against this threat. Urban trading hubs like Dublin and York arose under Norse lords. And the very map of power shifted as Scandinavia's pagan warrior elite gradually embraced the cross, sometimes by choice and sometimes at sword point. The fiery dragons of 793 were omens indeed, but not of apocalypse alone. They heralded a tempest that would scour old certainties, scatter seeds of change across oceans, and weave the North Atlantic into a single turbulent tapestry. Nearly 300 years later, when the last Viking fleet limped home from the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, Europe was unrecognizable. Tougher, richer, and indelibly marked by the descendants of those first raiders who stepped ashore on a June morning beside an isolated monastery. To understand the profound shock of the Lindisfarne raid and the opening of the Viking era, we must first delve deep into the world of the Anglo-Saxons in the late 8th century. Emerging from the ashes of Roman Britain around the 5th century, these Germanic peoples, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, had forged a patchwork of kingdoms across what is now known as England. Most important of these kingdoms were Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex. These kingdoms were very wealthy, very Christian, and often in violent struggles against one another. Warfare defined the Anglo-Saxons' precarious existence. The fyrd, or militia, levied masses of poorly armed and armored freemen for defense, while the warrior class of the elite thanes wore more impressive chainmail coats and were armed with expensive swords. Battles between the neighboring Anglo-Saxon kingdoms often were brutal and decisive, with victors absorbing the lands and peoples of the vanquished. Naval forces, known as the skipfyrd, were rudimentary, leaving the coasts very vulnerable. This vulnerability would soon be exploited by peoples from across the North Sea, a people who excelled at riding the ocean waves. For the Viking, war was not merely duty, but destiny. It served as a path to fame, fortune, and a seat in Valhall. In great epic songs and poems, the skalds sang of warriors who fed the raven and reddened the wolf's drink. Runestones boasted not of land defended, but of silver won, and foes vanquished over the sea. Combat was personal, contractual, and almost entrepreneurial. Often, a chieftain or jarl gathered a leave, a sworn warband, and promised them shares of loot and glory. Defeat brought no disgrace if a man died boldly. Cowardice alone damned the soul. This religious ethos bred audacity. Fueled by a hunger for glory and wealth, a single ship's crew of 40 or 50 men might strike a monastery, sack a local village, or extort Danegeld from a trembling local lord, and then vanish before a levy could assemble. Surprise was key. The Strandhog, a lightning beach raid to seize cattle and captives, became their signature form of attack. Their ships were the fulcrum of this surprise attack doctrine. As opposed to many of their neighbors, Scandinavian ships were clinker-built with overlapping planks, waterproofed with pitch. This gave their ships many unique properties. This clinker technique allowed their ships to be very shallow drafted, allowing ships to be able to beach on any sandbank, or to row up shallow rivers. The longship turned the sea from a barrier into a highway. Oars gave the Vikings tactical silence. A square sail, sudden speed. A fleet could appear at dawn, strike, and be gone by dusk, leaving only smoke and lamentation. On land, Vikings fought using skirmish tactics. They would use loose, mobile, shield-overlapping formations as a wedge to punch through a shield wall, or they would fan out into a crescent to envelop and crush it from behind. The goal of Viking warfare was not annihilation, but shock, to break morale, crack the enemy shield wall, and withdraw before their foes' numbers tipped the scale against them. The Anglo-Saxon, by contrast, saw war as a communal obligation, rooted in lordship and land. The fyrd was a militia of thane and chorl, summoned by the king's writ or the shire reeve's horn. Every freeman owed trinoda necessitas, bridge work, burr work, and service for the host. Battle was therefore defensive, territorial, and seasonal. Campaigns often opened after the spring plowing, and armies often dissolved to participate in the harvest. The shield wall was both tactic and metaphor. Ranks locked shoulder to shoulder, spears bristling, a living hedge of lindenwood and iron. To break this demanded mass, not maneuver, and to hold this line in the heat of battle was often equivalent to preserving the kingdom itself. Anglo-Saxon armies were larger but slower. A great levy might number 2,000, yet it marched on foot burdened by wagons and tethered to supply lines. Cavalry was almost unknown, as horses usually only served to ride into battle. Tactics were often blunt. Advance in dense shield wall formation, hurl javelins at the enemy, and then close the distance to thrust and hack. Victory came from endurance, holding the wall until the enemy wavered, rather than from flanking or pursuit. Retreat from battle was unthinkable. Most thanes swore oaths that bound men to their lord while life lasted. In addition to these powerful oaths, Thanes would often be shunned or outcast from society if they fled the battle and failed to protect their lord. The collision of these philosophies was catastrophic for the Anglo-Saxons. At Lindisfarne, at Portland, and at countless undefended beaches, the Vikings struck where no wall stood. The fjord could not assemble in hours, and by the time the more disciplined Thanes arrived, the raiders were already back at sea. Even when armies met at Ashdown, Eddington, and Malden, the Vikings' mobility let them choose the ground, feign retreat, or strike at dawn from marsh or forest. Only Alfred's genius of creating fortified burhs every 20 miles and creating a defensive fleet of ships turned the tide, and even then by borrowing some Viking methods. After their initial invasion, the Vikings settled in the north of England in the Danelaw. They were no longer raiders striking and vanishing with the tide, but they were drawn into a grinding conquest of land, loyalty, and survival. By the time of the great King Knut, Scandinavian rulers no longer led loose warbands alone. They commanded housecarls, similar to the Saxon thanes, professional warriors bound by pay and oath. These were not raiders of the shoreline, but soldiers of a new kingdom. Silver taken from England flowed north through tribute, trade, and taxation, filling Danish coffers and reshaping Scandinavian economies. Coin replaced hack silver, kings replaced chieftains, and power began to root itself in the land just as much as the plunder. At the same time, English law in the Danelaw absorbed Norse customs of oath swearing, compensation, and collective responsibility, until courts, contracts, and even language bore the marks of this shared world. In the end, these warrior cultures did not merely clash, they fused. Out of bloodshed and bargaining alike emerged a hybrid medieval order, harder, more disciplined, and more resilient than either parent. One forged not in isolation, but in the long, violent intimacy of conquest and coexistence. Lindisfarne was not the end of the world, but it was the end of a belief. Before that June morning in 793, the people of Britain believed the sea was a boundary, an edge beyond which danger could not reach. After Lindisfarne, that illusion lay in ashes. The North Sea was no longer a shield, it was a road. What followed would not only be a single raid, but centuries of change. The Vikings returned not only as raiders, but as settlers, traders, kings, and eventually fellow Christians. They founded towns, reshaped kingdoms, and left their mark on language, law, and bloodlines. England itself would be forged in the shadow of their sails. The Anglo-Saxons adapted or perished. They built fortresses, organized fleets, and learned to fight an enemy who struck without warning and vanished with the tide. In time, they would resist, endure, and transform, just as their enemies did. And so the Viking Age did not simply destroy the old world, it created a new one. The dragons seen in the sky in 793 were not signs of the apocalypse, but of an arrival, of a force that would bind the North Atlantic together in fire, steel, and ambition. Lindisfarne still stands today, quiet, windswept, and open to the sea. The old burnt ruins, left by the initial Viking attack, are nothing but a distant memory, preserved only by the quills of scribes. However, amidst the stone ruins of the later medieval monastery, lingers the moment when history turned, when two worlds collided, and when Europe began to change forever. Thank you for joining me today on History Imperium. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and comment about what you would like to see next. I really appreciate your feedback as it helps me to improve the channel and to provide you with the best experience possible. Keep learning about the past, and as always, I will see you in the next one.